The flowers were already arranged, 200 white roses, 12 centerpieces, a hand-painted welcome sign with my brother's name and his fiancée's name in gold script. I had driven 3 hours to be there. I had paid for the florist. And when I walked through the door of my parents' house carrying a garment bag and a box of champagne flutes I had ordered custom from a shop in Portland, my brother's fiancée looked at me from across the room, tilted her head, and said loudly enough that the 6 other people standing there could hear every word. "Oh, she actually came. I figured you'd flake like usual. You've always been kind of background noise in this family, haven't you?" My brother laughed. Not a nervous laugh. A real one. My mother turned back to the stove. My father said nothing. I set the champagne flutes on the table. I smiled. And I said, "Congratulations, you two." That was a Saturday evening in October. By Tuesday afternoon, I had pulled every single thing I was quietly holding together for that wedding, and I did it without sending a single text. Let me back up. My name is not important. What is important is that I am 31 years old. I work as a project manager for a mid-sized logistics company in Denver, and for the past 4 years I had been, without any formal acknowledgement, the financial spine of my family's life. It started small, the way these things always do. My father had a health scare when I was 27, nothing fatal, but serious enough that he was out of work for 4 months. My mother had been working part-time at a dental office for years, just enough to cover groceries and the occasional bill. My brother, who is 2 years older than me, had recently moved back home after a breakup and was getting back on his feet, which apparently meant sleeping until noon and applying to jobs he had no intention of taking. I started covering the mortgage payments during those 4 months. Just temporarily, everyone said. Just until Dad got back on his feet. Dad got back on his feet. The payments did not stop. By the time I was 29, I was covering the full mortgage, $1,412 a month, plus my parents' car insurance, the streaming subscriptions they used, a cell phone plan that included my brother's line, and periodic loans that were never discussed again after they were handed over. I had also, at my mother's request, co-signed the lease on my brother's apartment when he eventually moved out because his credit score was, in her words, going through a rough patch. I want to be clear about something. I did not do any of this because I was asked once and said yes. I did it because I was asked, and then asked again, and then it was simply assumed. And then when I made any noise about it, the conversation always circled back to some version of, "You're the responsible one. You've always been the stable one. You know how hard things are for the rest of us." My brother was the one my parents talked about at every family gathering. His potential, his charm, his big plans that were always just around the corner. When he got engaged to his fiancée last spring, my mother cried happy tears for an hour. When I got promoted at work 6 months earlier, my mother said, "That's great, honey," and asked me if I could add an HBO subscription to the family plan. I noticed. I always noticed. But I kept showing up, and I kept paying, and I kept telling myself that family means you carry things without keeping score. I stopped believing that on a Saturday evening in October, in a house I was quietly funding, in front of people who watched a woman call me background noise and did not say a single word. The engagement party was for 40 guests. My mother had been planning it for 3 months. She had called me every week with updates, the caterer, the rental chairs, the photo booth, the custom cookies with my brother's and his fiancée's initials on them. I had listened to every call. I had also, over those 3 months, wired a total of $6,200 to help cover costs, because my parents just needed a little help getting it off the ground, and my brother was still stabilizing financially. $6,200 for a party celebrating a woman who called me background noise. After I set the champagne flutes on the table, I went to the bathroom, closed the door, and stood at the sink for about 90 seconds. I looked at myself in the mirror. I thought about what I had driven 3 hours to do. I thought about the florist invoice I had paid. I thought about every single phone call with my mother that ended with a Venmo request. I dried my hands. I walked back out. I stayed for 2 more hours, made conversation, ate a stuffed mushroom, and watched my brother spin his fiancée around the kitchen to a song playing from a Bluetooth speaker I had also bought for my parents 2 Christmases ago. I left at 9:30. I hugged my mother. I told my brother, congratulations again, genuinely, because whatever I felt about his fiancée, I did not want to carry bitterness toward him. He hugged me back and said, thanks for coming all this way, Soph. That was the most he said to me all night. I drove 45 minutes to my hotel. I had paid for my own room, of course, and I sat on the bed with my laptop open, and I started making a list. Not an angry list, a precise one. Here is what I had that my family did not know about, or had forgotten, or had chosen not to think too hard about. The mortgage auto-pay came from a joint account that my father had added me to 4 years ago when he was in the hospital, so that I could keep things running. My name was on that account. My money was the only money going into it. My brother's apartment lease had my signature on it as co-signer. The rent was $1,100 a month. He had been 3 weeks late twice in the past year, and both times the property management company had called me. The cell phone plan was in my name, all 4 lines. My parents, my brother, and his fiancée, who I had added 8 months ago as a temporary favor while she sorted out her plan. The streaming services were all on my credit card. Netflix, Hulu, Disney+, the HBO my mother had asked for. The car insurance for my parents' 2 vehicles was bundled with my own policy because it saved money, and I had been paying the full premium and never separated it out. And then there was the wedding venue deposit, 2 months before the engagement party. My mother had called me near tears because the venue they wanted for the wedding, a barn-style event space about an hour outside of town, required a non-refundable deposit of $3,500 to hold the date, and they needed to pay it within 72 hours or lose the date. My brother did not have it. My parents did not have it. Could I just cover it and they would pay me back before the wedding? I had covered it. My credit card, my name on the contract. The wedding was scheduled for the following June. I sat on that hotel bed and I looked at my list and I thought about one thing very clearly. Almost none of what I was funding belonged to me, but almost all of it was in my name or ran through my hands. I did not make any moves that night. I slept on it. I drove home Sunday morning. I went to work Monday. I told exactly one person, my closest friend, Diane, who works in family law, what had happened at the party. Diane listened to the whole story without interrupting. Then she asked me 2 questions. First, was the venue deposit refundable? I told her no, but the contract was in my name, and I had looked at the fine print. If I canceled more than 9 months before the date, I would lose the deposit, but the venue would release the date and no further payment would be due. The wedding was 8.5 months away. I was still inside the 9-month window by 2 weeks. Second question, did my brother or his fiancée have anything in writing confirming our financial arrangements? Any texts where they acknowledged the money as a loan? Any agreement about the co-signed lease? No, nothing in writing, just years of phone calls and Venmo transfers with notes like mortgage oct and help with deposit. Diane said, "You're not doing anything wrong. You're just stopping." I thought about it for one more day. Tuesday morning, I set up a security camera on my front door and one small indoor camera in my home office facing my desk, not because I expected anything specific, just because I had learned, from watching what happened to other people in situations like mine, that when you stop being the person who funds everything, the people who depended on you can become unpredictable. I wanted a record. Then I sat down and I started, methodically, to stop. I called the venue first. I explained that I needed to cancel the reservation. The coordinator was apologetic. She confirmed that per the contract, I would forfeit the deposit since I was within the window, but I would have no further financial obligation and the date would be released. I said I understood. She processed the cancellation and sent me a confirmation email within the hour. Then I went into the cell phone account and I removed my brother's line and his fiancée's line. Their phones would show no service within 24 hours. I left my parents' lines active for the moment they were elderly, and I was not trying to leave them stranded. But I made a note. Then I canceled Netflix, Hulu, Disney+, and HBO, effective immediately. Then I logged into the joint bank account and transferred the balance, which was my money, to my personal account. I did not close the joint account because it was tied to the mortgage auto-pay. I left the account open with a 0 balance. The mortgage auto-pay was scheduled to pull in 11 days. When it pulled and found nothing there, it would fail. Then I called my insurance provider and asked them to separate my policy from my parents' vehicles. The agent told me the change would take effect at the next billing cycle, which was in 18 days. I confirmed. I did not send any texts. I did not make any calls. I went back to work. By Wednesday evening, my brother called me 4 times. I did not answer. His fiancée texted me, "Hey, my phone isn't working. Can you check the plan?" I read it. I did not respond. Thursday morning, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. She said, "Honey, the TV apps aren't working, and I think something is wrong with your brother's phone. Can you call me back when you get a chance?" That same afternoon, I got a call from the venue coordinator. She was calling to confirm that the family had contacted her trying to reverse the cancellation. She told them that the cancellation had been processed by the account holder, me, and was final, and that the deposit was non-refundable. She was calling me as a courtesy to let me know. I thanked her. I asked her if there was any scenario in which another party could reinstate the reservation without my authorization. She said no. The contract was in my name. I was the only person who could have made or reversed the cancellation. That was the moment it started to reach them. My father called me Friday morning. He did not start with hello. He said, "What did you do?" His voice was the kind of quiet that is louder than yelling. I had not heard that voice since I was 16 and had come home past curfew. I said, "Good morning." He said the venue called. He said the streaming was gone. He said my brother's phone was dead. He said the mortgage payment was going to bounce in a week and a half, and did I understand what that meant for their credit? I said, "I do understand. I've been managing that account for 4 years." He said, "You cannot just this is your family, Sophie." I said, "I know it is." He said, "Your brother is getting married. You would do this now, right now?" I said, "The venue deposit was mine. The contract was in my name. The phone plan was in my name. The streaming accounts were on my card. I have every right to cancel what I'm paying for." He said, "What about the mortgage?" I said, "I'd recommend setting up your own auto pay before the 15th. He went quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Your brother's fiancée is going to be part of this family." I said, "I heard what she said about me at the party. You were standing right there." He didn't say anything. I said, "I have to get back to work. I hope you have a good day." I hung up, and I sat very still for about 3 minutes. My hands were not shaking, which surprised me. I think I had been holding that conversation in my chest for 4 years without knowing it, and now that it was out, there was just a strange, hollow quiet where the weight used to be. The next 10 days were not quiet for everyone else. My brother called 6 more times before I picked up. When I finally answered, he did not yell. He sounded like someone who had just realized the floor he had been standing on was made of something thinner than he thought. He said, "I don't understand why you're doing this." I said, "At your engagement party, in front of 6 people, your fiancé called me background noise. You laughed." He was quiet. I said, "I've been paying your phone bill for 8 months, including hers. I've been on your lease for 2 years. I put down the deposit on your wedding venue with my own money. And you laughed." He said, "She didn't mean it like that." I said, "What did she mean?" He didn't have an answer. I said, "I'm not angry at you. I genuinely mean that. But I'm done funding a life where I'm the person in the background. If you want to talk, actually talk, I'm here. But I'm not here to be a payment processor for people who think I'm optional." He said he needed to think. I said, "Okay." We hung up. His fiancée texted me 3 more times over the following week. The first 2 were variations of asking me to fix the phone plan. The third one said, "I can't believe you're doing this over a comment I made at a party. You're ruining everything." I read all 3. I did not respond to any of them. My mother stopped calling after the first week. My father did not call again. On day 11, the mortgage auto pay pulled from the joint account and found 0. It failed. My parents received a notice from the bank. My father called me once more, late on a Sunday night. He said, "The payment bounced." I said, "I know. You'll want to get that sorted before there's a late fee." He said, "Sophie?" Just my name, nothing after it. I said, "Good night, Dad. I meant it without malice. I really did. I want to tell you about my cousin, Mara, because this part matters. Mara is 24. She is my mother's sister's daughter. and she had been loosely orbiting my family for years, showing up at holidays, getting pulled into group chats, occasionally enlisted to help with things. What most people did not know, because Mara did not talk about it, was that my brother had borrowed money from her twice over the past year. Small amounts, $300 once, $500 another time. He had never paid her back. When she gently asked about it, he told her she was being weird about money and that family didn't keep score. I found out about this the week after I made my calls, when Mara texted me out of nowhere. She had heard through the family chain that something had happened. She wrote, "I don't know what's going on exactly, but whatever you did, I feel like I should know about it. He owes me $800 and acts like I'm the problem for remembering." I called her. We talked for almost 2 hours. I told her everything. She was quiet for most of it, and then she said, "I've been embarrassed about $800 for months. I kept thinking I was being petty." I said, "You're not petty. You lent money you needed and it wasn't returned. That's just a fact." I helped Mara draft a message to my brother, clear, unemotional, not aggressive, just specific. The dates, the amounts, a request for repayment within 30 days. She sent it. He read it and did not respond for a week. Then he Venmo requested her $500 of it, which was not the full amount. But Mara was so relieved to see anything at all that she felt lighter just from the acknowledgement. She called me after she got it and said, "I forgot what it felt like to not just accept whatever someone gives me and pretend it's enough." I thought about that for a long time. 6 weeks after the engagement party, my brother called me on a Tuesday night. He was not calling about the venue or the phone plan. He sounded different, less like someone managing a situation and more like someone who had run out of things to manage. He said that the wedding planning had stalled because they couldn't find a venue in their budget that had an available date anywhere near what they wanted. He said things had been tense at home. He said his fiancée had been difficult about a lot of things lately, and he didn't know what to do about it. I listened. He did not ask me to fix anything. He just talked. It was the longest conversation we had maybe ever had that wasn't about logistics or money or a family event that needed coordinating. At one point he said, I don't think I've really seen you very clearly for a long time." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said, "You can start now." He said he was sorry for laughing at the party. He said he had been embarrassed and froze and made the wrong choice. He said he didn't think I was background noise. He said he thought I was the most competent person in the family, and that somewhere along the way, that had turned into everyone just assuming I'd handle everything, and that wasn't fair, and he was sorry. I told him I appreciated that. I meant it. I told him I would always be his sister. I told him that was not conditional on anything, but I told him I was not going back to the arrangement we had before, not any part of it. If he needed money, he could ask me like an adult asks another adult, and we could talk about it. But automatic and assumed was over. He said he understood. We did not hug through the phone, but it felt, in some small way, like something had shifted back to where it should have been from the beginning. My brother and his fiancée eventually booked a smaller venue, a restaurant back room that held 60 people instead of the barn that held 150. The wedding got pushed to the following fall. My mother called me once to tell me, in the careful voice she uses when she is trying to gauge my reaction, "It'll be a smaller thing, more intimate." I said that sounded nice. She asked if I was coming. I said I hadn't decided yet. I told her that was honest. I was still deciding. The mortgage got sorted. My father set up his own auto pay. My parents separated their car insurance from my policy, and their premiums went up significantly, which my mother mentioned to me in a tone that suggested I was responsible for the increase. I reminded her gently that I had been covering the difference for 3 years. She went quiet and then said the weather had been nice lately and changed the subject. Some things do not resolve cleanly. I want to be honest about that. There was no dramatic confrontation where my family gathered in a room and recognized every year of labor I had quietly provided. My brother's fiancée never apologized. My father never said the words, "I see what you did and I understand why." My mother never acknowledged the $6,200 I had wired for a party where I was called background noise. What happened instead was smaller and more permanent. The financial pipeline closed. I remained a person in this family, but I became a person with a boundary that was no longer theoretical. Everyone could feel where I ended and where they were expected to manage themselves. And something else happened, which I did not expect. I started sleeping better. Not a metaphor, actually sleeping better. I would wake up in the morning, and there was nothing pulling at me before I was ready. No missed call from my mother about a payment. No text from my brother about a bill. No low-grade hum of someone else's financial anxiety that I had absorbed so completely I had stopped noticing it as separate from my own. I went to Portland for a long weekend in November, just because I wanted to. I stayed in a nice hotel and I walked around and ate oysters by myself at a restaurant bar and talked to a man named Greg who worked in marine biology and knew nothing about my family and had no reason to need anything from me. It was one of the best weekends I had had in years. Mara came to visit me in Denver in December. We went to a holiday market and drank mulled wine, and she told me she had started being more direct with people in her life about money and expectations, and it had been uncomfortable and also completely worth it. She said she kept thinking about something I had said on the phone, about being a payment processor for people who think you're optional. She said, "I put that on a sticky note." I laughed. I said, "I can't believe I said something sticky note worthy." She said, "You've been saying smart things for years." Nobody was listening. It is strange, being seen by someone who has known you your whole life, but only recently looked directly at you. Strange and good. I want to say one more thing about the engagement party, because I think about it sometimes. Not with anger. The anger burned off a long time ago and left behind something more like clarity. I think about the moment I set the champagne flutes on the table. I think about how I smiled and said, "Congratulations," and stayed for 2 more hours and ate a stuffed mushroom and drove 45 minutes to a hotel I paid for myself. I was not being weak in those 2 hours. I was thinking. I was looking at the full picture, clearly for the first time. The years of payments and phone calls and autopays and co-signed documents laid out in front of me like a map I had been walking without reading. And when I finally read it, I understood something I had been avoiding for a long time. You can love people and stop funding the version of themselves that doesn't see you. Those two things are not in conflict. I still send my parents a card on their anniversary. I call my mother on her birthday. I texted my brother when his engagement photos were posted online and told him the photos looked great, because they did. I am not estranged. I am not bitter. I am not waiting for an apology that may never come. I am just no longer the person holding the ceiling up while everyone else stands underneath it and complains about the height. That job is retired. I have other things to do.